Welcome. I'm so glad you joined us as we hit the road for native plants at noon. I'm Cydney Ross, Outdoor Education Manager and native plant enthusiast for Deep Roots. We have a great broadcast for you today as we explore the unique windswept landscape and migratory bird oasis known as Loess Bluffs National Wildlife Refuge. Before we begin, I'd like to make a couple announcements. First of all, we are incredibly grateful to you for your participation and support of our programs and webinars. We take pride in the educational content we create for viewers like you. We also want to express a big thanks to Missouri Department of Conservation for their partnership on this series and everything they do to encourage and empower people to get outdoors. Next month, you can hit the road and explore the areas we discussed on today's show. Saturday, December 2nd, I'm taking you to Loess Bluffs for a day of hiking, birding, and nature appreciation. It's going to be a blast, and I look forward to seeing you there. A link to registration will be dropped in the chat and included in the resources following today's show. If you enjoy our programs, be sure to register for the 2024 Planet Native Conference. After 3 virtual years, we're excited to be back in person at the Kauffman Foundation and Discovery Center in Kansas City. I'm especially looking forward to Desiree Narango's keynote presentation. As a conservation scientist and research ecologist, she empowers communities to support declining bird populations through simple actions. As we settle into winter and observe all of our feathery friends, you know what we plant matters for all birds, including residential or migratory. During today's program, if you have questions, please note those in the Q&A tool on Zoom, and we will get to as many of those as we can. My esteemed colleague, Chris Cardwell, will be using the chat to send you the plants mentioned and any links shared. Loess Bluffs National Wildlife Refuge was established on August 23, 1935 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt as a feeding and breeding ground for migratory birds and other wildlife. This refuge contains over 7,000 acres along the eastern edge of the Missouri River, featuring floodplains, which include the wetlands, grasslands, and forests. Overlooking the refuge from the east is the Loess Bluffs habitat. These unique hills stretch about 30 miles south of St. Joe, Missouri to extreme northern Iowa. Some of the last parcels of native plants, remnants of a once vast native prairie, can be found here. On an average year, the refuge supports up to 200,000 ducks during fall and winter seasons, and upwards of 1 million snow geese. In 2020, they clocked a record of 661 bald eagles during an ecological survey. This refuge was officially named one of America's top 500 globally important bird areas by the National Audubon Society in 2001. Each year, I make a point to hike the trails and visit the auto tour to take in the thousands of migrating birds. It's really a sight to behold. Today, we're joining Jim Pierson, Private Land Conservationist for Missouri Department of Conservation, to learn about the biodiversity found at Loess Bluffs National Wildlife Refuge. Jim grew up among the Loess prairies in Northwestern Missouri and brings 23 years of experience working for MDC. His legacy in conservation is profound, as he works directly with landowners to preserve our native flora and fauna for future generations to come. Please stick around for the Q&A at the end to hear from Jim directly. All right, let's get started. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Native Plants at Noon on the road to Loess Bluffs. Jim, I'd like for you to introduce yourself to our guests here today at Native Plants at Noon on the road at Loess Bluffs.
Well, I'm Jim Pierson. I'm the Private Land Conservationist from the Missouri Department of Conservation. My 3 counties are Holt, Atchison, and Nottoway, and we're in Holt right now, here at Loess Bluffs Wildlife Refuge.
And tell the viewers, what is one thing that you absolutely love about Loess Bluffs, or that you hope people will either experience or appreciate when they visit a place like this?
Well, it's such a unique part. It's probably one of the most endangered ecosystems in the state. Our Loessville prairies are. You can tell there's lots of trees. They're Missouri's only dryland prairies. They have unique plants that you have to go 150 miles west to find them growing native again. They're super steep, and it's a beautiful place to be. I mean, I grew up in them. I didn't even realize we lived in such a unique area. But now, once I figured it out, it was great.
I remember when I first learned we had bald eagles in Missouri, and just mind-blowing. So can you talk a little bit about why the Loess Bluff prairies and the adjacent wetlands are important for the birds that you can find here at the refuge?
Well, of course, it's a migratory stop for the ducks and the geese, and gives them a chance to stop and recharge, get some energy from the food sources out there on the refuge. And also those weak ones, wounded ones, whatever, provide a food source for the eagles. So we've got them all together here. It's pretty neat. When I was a kid, I don't remember seeing eagles that much, and now we've got them. It's pretty common.
Yeah, hundreds of them here sometimes even, right?
Well, one time we were burning my father-in-law's prairie. It's a bowl area, and we got done, and my wife goes, look around us, and the trees on the areas that weren't in prairie, we counted like 30 eagles. They were just waiting for something to come out of there on fire so they could get it, and yeah, it's really unique around here.
It's amazing. So Jim, how would you describe the type of habitat that we're in currently in this woody kind of area just outside the bluffs?
Well, it's a lower area, so it probably would have had some trees in it. There was some shagbark hickory that we just passed. Usually the trees you thought about, like higher up where it's drier, bur oaks and chinkapin oaks. So this would just be like a little, almost probably a early successional type of timber.
My favorite way to see if a little tree is a pawpaw is they have these velvet tips right here, if you can see that. They're so soft and velvety, and that's a great way to know if you're looking at a pawpaw. And notice all of these little trees here, these are all pawpaws, very young pawpaws. And notice the trees aren't trying to leaf blow, they're doing the fact that we have stairs on a prairie, right? I mean, I know we're kind of in a woodland area, but historically, prairie edge, it's really impressive. And I don't think there's a lot of places like this here in Missouri, are there?
Well, the Loessville prairies are Missouri's only dryland prairies. There's plants on them. You got to go 150, some of the plants. You have to go 150 miles west to find them indeed. And this was it's the only place you're going to find dryland prairies next to wetlands.
Well, this will be the hardest part of the hike, folks. Oh, Lord. I told you I'm a naturalist, not an athlete. This is amazing, though.
So you get up here on the top, chances are. Yeah.
So this flat area here.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's probably a crop field at one time, but now it's, the refuge that sowed back to native vegetation. But you can see the fight you have in these hills, why it's always fighting between prairie and trees.
If you look at all the dogwoods coming up, the young oaks, so it's always a battle.
Right.
In fact, when you think our Loess prairies came to be, like 6,000 years ago, was what's called the hypsothermal period. Years and years, centuries of drought. And the shortgrass prairies that were found out western Nebraska, Kansas, Wyoming, moved all the way to Ohio. When the rains started coming back, then the eastern deciduous forests and the tallgrass prairies started coming. These areas were still so arid because of their slope, the amount of water that runs off of them. What doesn't run off just percolates through because you get pretty big pore spaces in that silt soil. The dryland prairies stayed on them. But what's cool is our Loess prairies are the very eastern edge of the shortgrass prairies from out west. And if you look across the river at Nebraska and Kansas at those timbers, they're the very western edge of those eastern deciduous forests. So yes, there's a battle going on all the time in these bluffs.
Constant
Yeah.
shifting and
Yeah.
yep. And if you're trying to manage a prairie like this, or keep a prairie like this rather, then management is really crucial.
Oh yeah, it is. And you know, it's hard to find time and the manpower to burn something this small. So,
Yeah.
at any rate, it's
Now I'm gonna bush clover. I just want to get in here real quick to show. So winter interest is something I really appreciate about our natural area, especially this time of year, because it's often overlooked, right? But it's a really important stage for a plant's life to finish its cycle, reseed, establish future generations, and it provides food and habitat for wildlife too.
Yep, very important for that. You consider like a little old quail. March is their starving time of year because most of the seed is fell and everything. So if we didn't have these native wildflowers out and about, they would starve much sooner.
Yeah,
I mean,
they
it would be hard up anyway, maybe not starve.
See how prolific the berry clusters are on this vine, which you may be familiar with it because it's used as a decoration in the fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I prefer to grow the native kind because you see how prolific and damaging this plant can be. So the reason why a lot of these non-native invasives get a foothold is because they haven't adapted with our wildlife. So there's no biological pressure to keep things in check, right? It's just like, woohoo, free for all for this plant. So instead of buying a cutting of this for fall of the non-native kind that you could then potentially spread, maybe consider planting the true native in your backyard on a trellis. Or just go for a walk and enjoy the beauty. What naturalized means, because I know that word gets tossed around quite a bit, especially when we talk about native plants. What's your definition?
Well, it's a non-native plant to the ecosystem that has become adapted to it.
Like over time?
Yeah. I mean, like blackberry lily doesn't really hurt anything, and it doesn't become invasive like the Asian bittersweet like that.
Right.
But it's just become part of the environment now.
It's just
basically.
kind of learned to adapt. And so I wonder too with naturalizing, and maybe this is a conversation for another time, but does it also mean some of our wildlife has adapted with it, like to use it as food, or like, so I'm just curious about.
I suppose it could.
Yeah.
I don't think I have a ton of this around the old farmhouse I'm working on, and I can't remember anything eating on it. No insects or anything.
Yeah.
You know, that's why it's important to use native plants. When we bring in, coming from a horticulture background, we bring in stuff that isn't native. Chances are there's no caterpillars working on that tree or that bush, and we've got all sorts of songbirds that are relying on those caterpillars, to feed their little ones, and they're not there because there's nothing native, no native predator for that tree or that shrub. So it's very important that we do plant native plants.
Yeah.
Just because, let's face it, we can really wreck things if we want to. Growing up, I walked a lot of soybeans. This was before there was Roundup Ready corn and soybeans. I walked a lot of them. And public enemy number one was milkweed.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget, we bought our first house in the town of Oregon, and I stacked our firewood out along a retaining wall, and I cleaned it all up, and that year a milkweed popped up, and I became a rebel right then and there. I said, I'm just going to leave this. I've never seen one grow. And when it bloomed, it smelled so good and everything. I thought, man, look what we cut out. And maybe damaged some monarch habitat too.
Yeah, that's really a remarkable story to hear.
Yeah.
Kind of, you know, we are imprinted with this idea, this is bad, this is good. But then when you give nature a chance, you're like, you know what, let me just wait a second and just see what happens. You really learn to appreciate it and fall in love with it.
Yeah.
And then you start to see the connections, the relationships, how intricate and important those are.
Very important. Yeah, it's a web.
Yeah, it really
That's-
is.
So at any rate, now I'm loving it. People are, you know, of course, the genetically modified crops that you can use the different chemicals on. It's not so important to eliminate everything. And, you know, we'll see people with butterfly milkweed in front of their house.
Yeah.
Really cool.
I love that.
We planted it in front of our church.
Wonderful.
And we re-landscaped, and all the young people that were there fell in love. Gone dormant. This is dotted blazing star, Naturalist punctata. You can see where it was blooming up here. You will only find this in Missouri, here in the Loess Hills, because it is one of the dryland species of Naturalist. So it's dotted blazing star. I was really tickled to see that here. That is a really cool one. It's one of my favorite plants. It blooms about the same time as stiff goldenrod, so you have that purple and yellow together. It's really eye-catching.
That's perfect, thank you.
We can pick out some more of the listed species up here. And then you can kind of see the difference, the little blue stem and the Cydney behind it. You can see that color, if I get out of the sunlight. See that color on that little blue stem, just gorgeous. And the Cydney gets its name because all the seeds go up one side, and it looks like oats. Kind of, again, I'm in the sunlight. Here we go. So that's pretty cool. They're some of my favorite. They only get about 18 inches tall. The little blue stems are really important if you want better quail habitat. It's very stiff and upright. Get a big snow and it won't go down. So that upright plant is there next year for the quail to nest in. I dug one up out of my father-in-law's CRP one time for a youth pheasant clinic to show the kids, and I said, see how thick this is? A quail could nest in there, and they had. There was no quail in there at the time. It was,
But there was a nest.
yeah, there'd been a nest in it. Yep. Yeah, watch out. Yeah, you could very easily. There's some of that. I believe that thing.
Is it narrow leaf? Goldenrod?
Yep, or the stiff. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, look how slender the leaves are on these. And so tiny. Kind
Yep,
of like, you know,
it doesn't get very tall at all, especially in this dry environment.
well, I was going to say much like a glade. You'll see certain glade species that stay really short too. Oh, and here's some more side oats. Maybe you
Yep.
pointed that out up there.
There it is, it's really dry.
Look at this, blue sage. Check that out. Gorgeous. I even love them when they're dry. You know what? Hold up. You know what? That's not blue sage. You know what this is? I just found out by the leaves. This is lead plant. Would lead plant be up here?
Look at the
Look at-
stem. It
look at
almost
that.
becomes woody.
It
Yeah.
is. That okay, cool. What? I love that.
Lead plant's one of my favorite plants. There's like 14 different shades of purple in every one of them.
They really are. And I love they have the orange pollen, so whenever you see a bumblebee,
you know, collecting on it, they have little orange pants.
Yeah, they do.
I'm a big fan of that. God, look at this.
Okay, see the plant out here with the yellow leaves?
Uh-huh.
That's prairie willow.
Oh, nice.
And you do find that in the Loess Hills too. That is really cool. I think it's a cool little plant. That and dwarf chinkapin oaks. They don't get very tall at all.
Yeah, stay nice and small on this dry prairie edge.
Another one is this wispy looking grass here. It's called muley or Muhlenbergii.
Huh.
And you'll find it in the Loess Hills too.
Okay, so we've got lead plant here.
Yep, it's a cool little lagoon. You can tell, like a lagoon, it's got the neatly compounded leaves on it. It's just a really neat plant. I'd recommend it for any landscape.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, this is one of those really cool plants that are listed, you know, here in the Loess Hills. This is hairy grama, and it's got that really cool seed head on it. I like what you said about being an eyelash.
It does. To me, it looks like false eyelashes.
I had never thought about that before. This is some really healthy ones. It's got really long seed heads on them.
So,
this is really good.
Is this Bouteloua hirsuta or gracilis?
You know, I'm going to tell you right now, I don't remember.
That's okay. I can't, honestly, I need to learn how to tell the difference between the two. I'm guessing hirsuta has hairs, but I'm not seeing any on this.
I know it looks a lot like buffalo grass. That buffalo grass has a little, like an awn that kicks off of it. So it's really a neat little grass.
I love it. It's one of my favorites.
It likes it in these areas, you know, where it's been stomped. It's a little drier, a little harder to grow, and it will come out and express itself here.
Yeah.
And you can tell it is some dry stuff here too, isn't it? The
It
soil.
is. Yeah, do you mind telling us a little bit about this soil?
Well, it's Loess, which is German for loose, and it's just really powdery. You can see how it blows right off of there. Basically, you know, the cool thing is when you study soils, is they talk about loam being the perfect soil, and loam can be a perfect soil, but it's equal parts sand, silt, and clay. So this is Loess soil is all silt. If you take you know how you pour water in sand and the water immediately just runs right on through because you got big particles with big pore spaces in between. Clay soils are very, very tiny, very small pore spaces. Water drains very slowly. Silts are in between. They're probably closer to sands, and the water drains really quickly out of them. So you know, you've seen so far how steep these side hills are. The water that doesn't run off will percolate through this, and that is why these are Missouri's only dryland prairies. Now, this soil came here, people, scientists have thought, the last glacial period as it went north, they receded back north as it warmed up, and the glaciers went away. They ground a lot of quartz rock, at which you get this fine powdery silt. Every summer, you know, glaciers would melt, water would run down what is now the Missouri River Basin, and as it cooled down, that stuff would drop out of suspension of the water. It would kind of dry out there on those mud flats, and they think that high winds blew these hills into the shape that they are today. So this is all, we call it wind-blown soil, and it's really cool. You don't find it too many places along the Missouri River in Iowa, down through Missouri. There's some on the east side of the Mississippi in Illinois, but other places in the world, of course, Germany, where we get a lot of this from, the terminology like Loess, and then the Yangtze River in China, which is called the Yellow River, just like we call the Missouri the Big Muddy, because this is a very erosive soil, you can tell. You see how it went in the wind here today? Well, it goes just as fast with a heavy stream of water too. So, in fact, a lot of the bottomland farmers up here would put levees around their field, not to keep them from flooding, but to capture this soil
as it went eroded out of the hills, they capture it, put it over some of their gumbo soils. It's called made dirt, and it's really high, very productive soils. So, at any rate, that's kind of what Loess is. But yeah, this is some really. I mean, can you imagine coming over from, say, like the Isle of Man, and you're settling in Polk County, Missouri, and you've got soil like this, whereas you were picking rocks out of your farm all the time back over there, or even in, like New England had a lot of rocks in their soil. Now you've got this stuff, in some cases 200 foot deep. This is like probably heaven on earth to an early settler.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Struck gold.
Of
gold
course,
earth.
nobody's going to put a mule and a plow on this hillside right here, but as further east you go, it levels out some. Even the farm I own, and it shouldn't have ever been farmed, but it was.
Yeah.
But some of the early settlers here didn't raise so much as crop as they were livestock farmers. You'll see it in the early censuses. That's what they were doing, and orchards. Believe it or not, tons of apples were shipped out of Polk County many times.
This is a type of yucca.
Yep.
Soap leaf yucca?
Soapweed.
Soapweed yucca.
Yep.
How does this, is this the same type of yucca you might find in like a remnant of a homestead? Or like the kind
No.
that you plant, it's a different species
Yeah,
altogether?
this is a western species.
Okay.
You've got to go 150 miles west of here to find them again growing like this.
Wow.
And it's it gets its name because you dig it up, and the roots would actually make like a lather.
Okay.
And the settlers would use, especially the ones traveling out to like Oregon or whatever, some of the places where the hilltops were wide enough and the old trails went through, you don't find the yucca. They dug them all up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is it's a really cool. It's a yucca glauca.
Yucca glauca. And would this by chance be associated with the glauca moth? Are they? Do they have a host moth, or
Yes.
rather, does that moth use this yucca as a host plant?
Yes.
From what I understand, moths are so cool, right?
When they put up that stalk, and you got those seed pods on it, a lot of times you'll pull them off, take them open, and you see they've been eaten.
Yes.
So these are just really, it's really cool to see them when they're working on it.
I love it.
When I worked at Missouri Western for a couple of years, I was in the biology department some, and Dr. Dave Ashley, I don't know, off my father-in-law's farm, which is just south of here, he had tons of these. I don't know how many of those pods I picked off and carried down there, and they did get some started.
Did they?
Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, all of our viewers, or most of our viewers, know I'm a total nerd, but I'm especially a moth nerd. And then when my two favorite things come together, moths and native plants, I'm all about it. So
Yeah.
I think that's just really fascinating and speaks to the unsung heroes of the pollinator world, right? It's not just about our bees. It is about our bees and our butterflies, but so much more than that too, which
Yes.
makes it really exciting and unexpected. Very cool. I love this blue sky. Oh my gosh, even more little grasses here. Oh, this view.
Yeah, that's one of the best parts when you walk through.
See a lot of ducks. How's the rainfall been out here this year, Jim?
Well, it was really good earlier on. It's been dry fall, which is good for harvest, but it's getting pretty dry again. No, it was a good year. I mean, lots of good corn and soybean numbers. So
Good for the farmers.
it's good for them. It's good for our plants too. Our native plants. So no, it's quite a view, isn't it?
It really is.
The native tribes that were here, they held these hills to be sacred places.
I believe it. I see why.
You'll find a lot of, in the Loess Hills, along creeks, that's where you find a lot of arrowheads and stuff. But so,
but this land has been appreciated for thousands of years, you know, not just by people but wildlife. And
yeah.
that's so important. Can you all believe we're on a prairie right now? I this is wild. This is the tallest prairie I've been on, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's the cool part about it. You can be on Missouri's only dryland prairies, looking out at a vast, you know, wetland area out there.
Amazing.
So you got the driest part in the state next to some of the wettest.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's really neat. And the things that, you know, things have changed an awful lot too in my lifetime. I'm not gonna lie, I'm 63 years old. But you know, when I was a kid, it was really rare to see a deer, period. And then I can't remember seeing foxes. That sarcoptic mange had come through. Skunks, never saw a skunk. I was in my 30s and all these things come back. I heard a bobcat scream once,
Amazing.
but now we see them all the time. I mean, they take like 200 a year out of Nottaway County. None of them ever den them.
Well, that speaks to the efforts and
Yeah.
your legacy in conservation, Jim. You know, we need people like you who care and people like us who are interested in coming out and appreciating these places and taking care of them.
You know, more importantly than anything that I've done is I really appreciate the private landowners I've worked with here in the Loess Hills and the tremendous amount of hard work it takes to cut trees off of these hillsides. It's kind of dangerous. I had one roll me once on my father-in-law's. So yeah, those people deserve a lot of credit for what they've done.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things done. You know, Missouri is 97% private land. So what they do is very, very important. And even large farmers, you know, people complain sometimes about, no, they put in filter strips along creeks to keep our waters clean, field borders for quail. There's a lot of important things that get done, and I appreciate them very, very much.
This is one of our native mints.
I don't think this is the trail. Let me go see if I can find it.
Okay. While Jim's checking things out over there, I want to show you all. This is one of our mints. I'm guessing this is maybe slender mountain mint. I see some leaves. They look slender to me, but you can definitely tell by the dramatic dried seed head. Beautiful texture and color for that winter interest. And then if you take a little sniff, minty.
When Lewis and Clark came up the river, they talked about all the bluffs on this side of in their journal. He wrote that they were bald-pated knobs, the bluffs on this side of the river.
What's a bald what?
A bald pate.
Bald
All right,
pate.
since very seldom do people know what a bald pate is,
Okay.
today you can get an example. Okay.
Let's see it.
This is a bald pate. Pate is the old English word for the top of your head, and it will burn in the sun. But that's what they were saying, because when they, in 1803, 1804, these trees weren't on the side hills like they are now.
Yeah.
So a lot of my good cooperators are cutting those off, and it's a lot of hard work.
I bet. I mean,
Yeah.
just one false step and you might take a tumble or two.
Yes, it hurts.
But yeah, I could see the visual though of it looking like the top of a bald head
Yep.
from far. That's
Yep.
very interesting.
That up there kind of shows it. But like I said, there were very few trees on it at that time.
I'm still pretty gobsmacked that this is a prairie. And I think of our prairie friend, Bruce Schutte, who talks about how Loess prairies are the only ones you can truly fall off of. And if you take a look here and see how steep these inclines are, it is very clear that's true.
The incredibly steep slopes on these hillsides.
Yeah.
It always amazes me too, like down at River Breaks Conservation Area, there's a cemetery up the top of the hill. In fact, my wife's great-great-great-grandparents are there.
Oh, wow.
And you climb up one of these, think about how did they get them up there?
How did
Well, most times if you go back and look, they're more gentle at the bottom, and they'll find a way to get up. My daughter's Buick can actually drive up on hers.
Oh, wow.
That's about the only one I know where you can.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm on top of the world here.
I love coming up here. That's why this job, never once in over 23 years have I hated to get up and go to work. This has always just been a really great job.
I appreciate that so much, Jim.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oops, there it is. This is a great example of what the non-native invasive shrub, or also known as bush honeysuckle, can do to a landscape. Typically they start in the more open areas, and as the plants grow, you'll see the bright red berries. They spread prolifically, not just by tumbling down the hills, but dispersal from birds eating the berries and pooping out the seeds, which is like the perfect fertilizer for the berries in the first place. So you see how the issue gets exacerbated, especially as we mentioned earlier, these plants that did not start out here originally, they haven't adapted for thousands of years alongside our wildlife to be part of that system. You too can join us and experience Loess Bluffs in all its glory, both the prairies. You can come with me on the hike, and also join us on the auto tour on Saturday, December 2nd, if tickets are still available. But if not, I'm so happy you all could join Jim and myself and Chris here today at Loess Bluffs National Wildlife Refuge. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us on our exciting adventure to Loess Bluffs. We are going to go ahead and welcome Jim Pierson to the virtual stage and join us for a conversation about conservation and just Loess Bluffs in general and anything adjacent to that. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Doing just fine.
Thank you so much for your insight today. We had a blast exploring the prairies with you a couple weeks ago, and we're just so happy you're here today.
I'm glad to be here.
So Jim, before we jump into some questions, I want you to just give a little bit of background to your experience with Loess Bluffs, because not only have you worked in this area for 23 years, or at least worked with Missouri Department of Conservation as a private land conservationist, but you also grew up in this area. So can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like growing up and how it's shifted over the years?
Well, I grew up on a farm down south of Oregon, Missouri. It's just really a cool place to grow up. We had cattle, hogs. We were a very diverse farm. You live in the Loess Hills, you definitely get a lot of exercise when you're out like checking on the cows, counting them every day. I didn't realize that there was flat ground growing up, and it's really, really productive soil. So it was just a good place to be living on a farm.
Yeah. And while we were hiking, you kind of mentioned seeing the evolution of wildlife or the rewilding rather of these areas. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, like I said, when I was younger, we just didn't hardly see any, you just didn't see deer like you do now. And I can't remember seeing foxes, skunks. They just weren't around. I was out in them, out in a lot. So those species have come back pretty quickly. When I was younger, there was a lot of small farms, lots of cattle, hogs being raised. As agriculture has become more mechanized and much more modernized, those areas can't be farmed with the big equipment. So you start to see a lot of it growing back. back into native vegetation, little fields that can't be farmed.
Yeah. And with that native habitat, what are some wildlife that you've seen that has really stood out to you?
Well, like I said, the deer,
Mhm.
especially coming back like that, and turkeys.
Right. Mhm.
There's so many more now than in my life when I was younger. Um, of course, there was always a lot of squirrels and rabbits. Growing up, that was, you know, a lot of the hunting that we did, at least in the bluffs. Might be a few ponds, have some ducks out there too. But down in the Les Hills where I grew, and I do want to warn people, they come up and look, from Forest City north, it's just pure less soil. You go south of Forest City, get like the River Breaks Conservation Area, maybe even Honey Creek, start getting a lot more rock. So just kind of keep an eye out. We had timber rattlesnakes down there, some copperheads. Just don't want anybody getting hurt. But
Sounds exciting to me. I've always wanted to run into a copperhead. I'm a little too loud usually when I'm hiking, though. I scare them off, but
the whole time growing up, I was climbed up and down those hills before River Breaks was River Breaks. It surrounded our farm. The neighbors, I can't remember ever seeing a rattlesnake out in the wild. They were always around the house, or, you know, the dogs had them riled up. Our timber rattlers are pretty docile. They don't get too excited.
I've heard from our friend, I don't know, you probably know Larry Rizzo, former MDC employee, natural history biologist. He and I talked about rattlesnakes. He did a project tracking them, and he said they were the most cryptic, docile critters he'd ever encountered. He had a hard time encountering them. In fact, that's how much they like their isolation. So I hope that inspires people to not fear our scaly friends, because just like you and I, they're just there doing their thing and just kind of want to be left alone to enjoy it.
Yeah. Remember, if you're walking dogs out there, just kind of keep an eye on them. Laura and I did have a dog bit by a rattlesnake once. So,
Yeah, that's scary.
yeah. Other than that, that's the only time I've ever seen them mad, riled up, buzzing, because the dogs had them
Dog.
close.
Yeah, they're like, don't eat me. Understandable. I'd probably be the same way if I were that rattlesnake. But well, let's get off the snake topic and let's shift a little bit. So you had mentioned quail habitat, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the Conservation Reserve Program, the CRP, and
Sure.
just give a little insight about that.
A lot of through the Conservation Reserve Program, there are several different programs within it. And one that we really use a lot is called CP33. It's a field border where you use little blue stem and side oats grama and quite a few wildflowers, so many per acre. And we get to put on edges, especially, in today's world with mechanization and technology. We know from the combine what areas are not producing as well as others. And if you can, something that you're putting a high dollar seed on, and you're not getting a return, you put it back into those grasses. And the little blue stem inside it's very important. They're just really a thick, upright grass that the quail can nest in. And the wildflowers provide brooding area. On a quail chick is born, it's no bigger than your thumbnail. If they don't get out right away and start picking up insects there in late May, most of the seed from the year before is gone. If they don't start picking up, finding those insects, they're probably not going to make it. And the broadleaf wildflower plants are, draw in a lot more insects than grasses. So it's really good program. Even the regular, when you take a whole field, a lot of times they're the main ones to give you the most points to get in are little blue stem, side oats, and wildflowers.
Well, I love that. Not only, as you've described, they provide great ecological benefits, but as as someone who appreciates aesthetics as well, they're beautiful. I mean, those
Oh, yeah.
grasses, as y'all saw on our hike to virtually, they're stunning even this time of year. So they provide habitat throughout the year, and then on top of that, dotted with wildflowers. I mean, just beautiful.
Yeah, it's really great. I always tell a lot of the guys, like if I'm out with them trying to sell them, I said, look, you plant this, you get in trouble at home, you've got an instant bouquet there during summertime. Maybe get some brownie points.
There you go. That's perfect.
Yeah.
I love that. So,
Remember, yeah,
I
I'm a
was,
horticulturist by training, and I used to always tell the young boys who would come out and work like at the Parks Department in St. Joe, I said, "There's power in flowers," and they came to realize it too after a while. So,
they're really in so many ways, right?
yeah.
Power and flowers. I like that. That's a saying I'm going to hold on to dear to my heart. So speaking of your background as a horticulturist, and if I recall, you do have some interest in some of the native insects. We got a question from the audience from Julie asking, or rather stating that they're establishing a pollinator garden at their retirement community, and they're making a list of plants that have larval host characteristics. The more, the better. Do you have any recommendations on, it could even be plants that we saw on our hike, or even other native plants to Missouri that have some nice connections between larval insects? So thinking of plants that, like we mentioned, soapweed yucca. There's a moth that is related to that. Of course, we've got butterfly milkweed with the monarchs. Are there any that come to mind for you?
There's a large host of insects out there, and there's a lot of them, do have specific, hosts that they want to be on. But I would just recommend a lot of diversity. You're going to get a lot of different insects, feeding or on the plants. So I would use a lot of diversity. Of course, you
Mhm.
can't beat, coneflowers. Several of those you can use. The blazing stars are just excellent choices for color and to draw in those insects too. There's just coreopsis, just as many different ones as they can put in there. It'd be very important for having a good pollinator plot.
I love that. I think that's a great answer. Thinking of not just plants that maybe young insects feed on, but the other stages of their life and the other connections that they have. Something I also like to suggest for when you're designing a garden is to not only have diversity of plants, but when you're planting them, make sure you do little clusters of the same type of plant so the insects have a better chance of finding that plant as they're flying around. But I think that's a great suggestion. And you're absolutely right about the blazing star too. It's one of my favorites. It just packs a punch of color and is a great pollinator magnet, especially late in the season during the monarch migration.
And as people plant, large pollinator plots, just kind of look it over. Each plant has a specific, ecosystem it likes, and you can plant the whole, like an acre to a real diverse mix. But there'll be certain parts of that field that they're really going to thrive in a certain type of wildflower. And we'll notice that quite a bit over the years. Nature knows how to do it.
Yes, she does. And just got to take the time to observe it, which is why going out to visit our natural areas throughout Missouri is so important. And I really hope folks will join us on Saturday, December 2nd for our in-person hike. I already saw in the chat, we've got several people joining us. It's going to be a blast. And yeah, we hope everyone can come visit, whether you join us on the tour or just go visit sometime this winter. Loess Bluffs is the place to be in wintertime.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool.
Well, thank you so much, Jim. That is all the time we have for today. But before I go, I'm just going to share a couple more announcements with everybody. If you've missed any of our episodes, you can find them on deeproots.org. We record and post each one. And while you're on the site, we would be grateful if you would consider making a donation to Deep Roots to help offset the cost of producing educational content like you saw here today. Thank you and have a wonderful day. We will see you next time for our Lunch and Learn, the first Thursday in December. See you soon.